We'd often explore complex philosophical ideas, sort of these ancient blueprints for living. Today, we're diving deep, really deep into ahimsa, which, is the central pillar of Jainism. But we're moving beyond just the basic vow of nonviolence. We want to look at the tangible choices, the sometimes really surprising ways it shapes daily life for Jains.
That's exactly right. When we talk ahimsa, it's easy to think just about avoiding, well, obvious physical harm, killing animals, things like that. But it's much more precise. It's almost like a kind of spiritual physics, a blueprint for profound awareness. It really forces you to confront the consequences of every single action, small actions, from waking up to what you eat, even to how you earn a living.
Yeah, and our mission today is to unpack some of these principles that can seem, honestly, quite counterintuitive. Ideas that really challenge our modern assumptions about convenience, about efficiency. We're going to find out why everyday actions, things we barely think about, suddenly carry this immense spiritual weight in the Jain tradition.
Exactly. We need to understand let's say, the profound calculus behind these rules. For instance, we'll look at why just eating after sunset isn't just about digestion, but is actually considered a form of violence, why it escalates the harm you might inflict, even unintentionally.
And that famous one, right? Why choosing a potato, a simple potato,
Hmm.
carries a significantly heavier karmic weight than picking an apple. A real moral difference between a root and a fruit. It's an amazing example of this rigorous, systematic approach to ethical eating.
And then there's the really big one for modern life. We'll explore this powerful idea that your career path, your job, isn't just about economics. It's seen as a primary moral declaration, something that actively helps or hinders your spiritual journey towards ultimate liberation. That demands a kind of radical integrity.
So this isn't just some ancient theory for us to admire from afar. It's an intense practical blueprint for living consciously, and it really does challenge our 21st century habits of convenience and consumption head on. Let's get into it.
Okay, let's start where ahimsa is probably most visible, most absolute for Jains, the diet. When we talk about Jain vegetarianism, we really have to stress this point. Our sources make it clear. This is not a lifestyle choice, not a trend, not like, choosing to be vegan for health reasons. It's an absolute unwavering vow.
That's the cornerstone, absolutely. It's crucial to get that this is mandatory, it's non-negotiable for every single follower. Jainism is pretty unique globally in this respect. It requires all its followers, not just the monks and nuns, but the householders, the lay people too, to stick to a diet that completely avoids meat, fish, and eggs. This commitment, this absolute baseline of avoiding violence against what they call five-sense beings, those with mobility, higher sensory perception that sets the starting point. Okay, so that baseline is established. Minimal harm to complex life. But the discipline immediately goes much, much further, doesn't it? Which brings us to our first really counterintuitive idea. The concept that eating after sunset is considered a form of violence. I mean,
Yeah.
for someone used to grabbing a late dinner or a midnight snack, that sounds, well, arbitrary. What's the thinking behind that?
The rationale is actually quite brilliant, I think, in its focus. It's about minimizing unseen harm. We have to remember ahimsa isn't just about the big things we can see, it's applied universally. It extends to life forms that are invisible to our naked eye. We're talking about microscopic life, airborne beings, what Jains call jivas.
And the principle is that darkness itself changes the environment for these beings.
Exactly. When the sun goes down, a few things happen. First, obviously, our ability to see clearly, to inspect our food, our water, the surfaces where we prepare things, it decreases dramatically. But also, the environment changes. The air cools, maybe dew settles. And crucially, certain types of microscopic life that might be relatively dormant or less active during the bright daylight hours, well, they become much more active in the dark. They might move towards light sources like lamps or candles, or just become more prevalent in the air or on surfaces.
Ah, okay. So by continuing to eat or even just prepare food after dark, you are statistically increasing the chance of accidentally harming or consuming these tiny beings, these microscopic jivas that are now out and about.
That's precisely it. You're multiplying the chances of committing himsa violence simply because you're operating when your awareness is limited by darkness and when this specific kind of life is more active.
So it forces a complete restructuring of your day, spiritually speaking.
It really does. You're essentially limiting your window for eating to the hours when your awareness is naturally highest, and the risk to this specific category of microscopic life is believed to be lowest. It's a profound act of self-discipline. It means prioritizing the potential lives of these unseen creatures over your own convenience or hunger pangs. Think about it for a modern householder juggling work schedules, social events, travel. But the commitment holds. You try to structure your life to maximize nonviolence, even on this microscopic level.
That level of intentionality is,
Yeah.
wow, it's fascinating. So if the sunset rule is about minimizing unseen harm, let's move to the second deep dive, which seems to be about minimizing systemic harm to the food source itself. This is the one that often puzzles people the most. Why is eating a potato considered a greater act of violence than eating an apple? Most of us just see potatoes, apples, carrots, peas.
Yeah.
They're all just produce, right?
Yeah.
Morally equivalent.
We definitely treat them as equivalent because chemically, nutritionally, they're just food for us. But in the Jain tradition, they represent two fundamentally different moral transactions with the living world. And this difference is based on a really precise spiritual calculus of destruction. It's applied to the plant itself as a living organism.
Okay, walk us through that calculus. How does it work?
The core idea, the goal, is to preserve the life of the food source whenever possible. So think about root vegetables, potatoes, onions, garlic, carrots, beets, that sort of thing. As our source material clearly states, to eat these, you fundamentally have to rip the entire plant out of the ground, thus causing destruction. The very act of harvesting the root is the act of killing the entire plant organism. It ends its life cycle completely. It can't regrow. It can't produce more seeds from that particular plant body.
Right, whereas if you eat an apple or a pea from a pod or a tomato, the source, the tree or the vine or the bush, it survives. It can keep living and producing more fruit or pods.
Precisely. You're taking what's considered a secondary product. It's essentially a gift from the plant, or maybe its reproductive output. The plant organism itself lives on. And that difference, the survival or the death of the specific organism you are interacting with to get your food, that is the key moral factor here. It dictates the karmic weight, the level of himsa involved in the meal. It forces every Jain householder every single day to look at the food chain not just as energy, but as this complex series of moral choices and consequences.
Okay, so when you lay out rules like these, no eating after dark, rejecting a whole category of staple foods like potatoes and onions, the questions that inevitably come up must be things like, how did Jains actually reconcile this? I mean, if plants do have life, which Jainism clearly states they do, why eat them at all? Isn't eating plants still causing harm? Isn't it just a necessary evil?
That's a great question, and it really gets to the heart of the philosophy. It moves beyond just following rules into some profound ethical thinking. Jains absolutely acknowledge that survival itself requires some degree of violence, some himsa. It's unavoidable just to exist. But what they do is establish this incredibly rigorous hierarchical gradient of harm. The answer lies in their very nuanced categorization of all living beings, which they call jivas.
Right, the jivas. Tell us a bit more about that sensory hierarchy. How does that work?
Okay, so Jain philosophy categorizes all life based on the number of senses it possesses. This number is thought to correlate directly with a being's capacity for experiencing suffering, its awareness, and its spiritual complexity. At the top, you have 5 sensed beings: humans, most animals, birds, fish. They have touch, taste, smell, sight, and hearing. Causing harm to them is considered the most severe karmic offense because their capacity for suffering is highest. Then you move down the scale. 4 sensed beings lack hearing, like bees. 3 sensed lack sight and hearing, like ants. 2 sensed lack smell, sight, hearing, like worms. And finally, at the bottom, you have 1 sensed beings, Akendriya jivas. These possess only the sense of touch. This category includes all plants, but also significantly earth-bodied beings, water-bodied beings, fire-bodied beings, and air-bodied beings.
So plants are the least complex life form on this scale.
In terms of senses, yes, they are considered one-sensed. Therefore, consuming a one-sensed being, like a plant, is tolerated out of necessity for survival, because it minimizes the harm caused compared to consuming any other category of life.
So it's not really permission to harm plants freely, but more like a rule of ethical necessity. If you must eat to survive, choose the option that involves the least complex life form capable of suffering.
Exactly right. It's a kind of pragmatic necessity built into this ideal framework of aiming for zero harm. But then we circle back to the root vegetables, which kind of complicates this seemingly simple rule. They are one-sensed plants, yet they're avoided or treated with extreme caution. Why? This brings us to that really fascinating exception, the concept of anantakaya.
Anantakaya. That term sounds really profound. It translates, I think, as a single body containing infinite souls. That sounds almost mystical, maybe abstract. What's the practical moral implication? Why does that designation matter so much?
The moral implication is, well, it's exponential harm. The concept implies that these root systems, the potato tuber, the onion bulb, while appearing to be just one plant, are actually considered dense concentrations of life. They are seen as a single physical body that acts as a home, a host for countless other individual lives or souls. Jivas. Therefore, consuming that single body means causing destruction not just to the main plant, but to this multitude, this infinity of other lives residing within it. It's an exponentially greater act of violence than consuming a single fruit or even a single above-ground leaf or stem.
Okay, that's the spiritual explanation. If we try to translate that into, say, modern ecological terms, does that idea of infinite souls in a root system find any kind of tangible parallel? Does it resonate with what we know now about soil?
Oh, absolutely. And this is where you see this ancient wisdom connecting so powerfully with modern science. It's quite amazing. Think about what modern ecology tells us. When you disturb a complex root system, when you rip that potato or onion out of the ground, you're not just impacting the visible plant, you are devastating an entire, incredibly complex microscopic ecosystem. You're destroying fungal networks, the mycelium, countless species of bacteria, nematodes, tiny arthropods, all the organisms critical for soil health and nutrient cycling. The Jain concept of Anantakaya is almost a perfect spiritual metaphor for the immense interconnected biodiversity that's concentrated within the soil, specifically around the root zone, what scientists now call the rhizosphere.
Wow. So pulling up that potato isn't just killing one plant. You're effectively wiping out a miniature universe of interconnected life beneath the ground.
That's the implication, yes. And that's why respected Jain teachers like Muni Praman Sagarji in his discourses emphasize that consuming root vegetables is considered exceptionally violent, even within the category of plant life.
It carries the highest moral burden for harming a one-sensed being. It really shows this deep ecological awareness centuries, millennia before we had the term ecology.
It really does. The practice demands you consider the whole system, especially the hidden system beneath the surface, not just the convenient product you see on top.
Okay, that helps explain the plant hierarchy. But let's tackle that other big question, the one that must trouble anyone trying to follow this path sincerely.
Yeah.
The problem of unavoidable harm, the impossible standard. We are constantly harming microbes just by breathing, right? Or by drinking water, even if it's filtered. Or simply by walking across a floor, we might crush tiny insects. How do Jains deal with this constant, seemingly unavoidable himsa?
They deal with it head on, actually. Not by ignoring it, but by acknowledging it, classifying it, and then, crucially, mitigating it as much as humanly possible. They recognize this unavoidable harm. They give it a name, Aram Vini Himsa. This roughly translates to occupational harm or unavoidable harm, linked to simply maintaining the body and living. The philosophy is incredibly clear and sophisticated in distinguishing between this unavoidable harm and avoidable intentional harm.
So the goal isn't this impossible target of achieving zero harm ever. That's just not feasible if you're alive. The goal is more about maximum conscious effort, maximum awareness and mitigation.
Precisely. That's the key difference, intention and effort. Arambini Himsa is the harm that happens unintentionally or structurally just as a consequence of existing in the world, breathing, moving, digesting. But if you actively choose a profession that inherently involves violence, like being a butcher or a soldier, or if you choose to eat meat when plant-based options exist, that's classified differently. That's Sankalpi Himsa, harm committed with intention or through avoidable negligence. And the karmic consequences are vastly different, much more severe.
Okay, and that distinction explains the incredible rigor we often associate with Jain monks and nuns, right? The gentle sweeping of the path in front of them.
Yes, with a soft broom to gently move aside any tiny creatures.
Or wearing the mukhavasrika, the mouth covering.
To avoid inhaling airborne organisms.
And the elaborate filtering of water before drinking. These aren't just symbolic gestures, are they?
Not at all. They are hyper-practical daily rituals. They're specifically designed to minimize even that Arambini Himsa, the unavoidable harm caused simply by moving through space, breathing the air, drinking water.
It's like a constant, active declaration. I recognize that life exists everywhere, even where I can't easily see it, and I will make every possible effort to reduce my negative impact on that life.
Exactly. It elevates ahimsa from just being a moral rule you follow to being a comprehensive way of life, a lifestyle defined by this profound, active, moment-to-moment awareness. The intention behind every action, even breathing, is what carries the spiritual weight.
We've really established how ahimsa structures the day, structures the diet, all through this lens of minimizing harm and maximizing intention. So it seems only logical then that this deep commitment has to extend beyond what you eat, how you actually earn the money to buy that food, right? How you make a living. And this brings us to another really radical idea in the Jain tradition. Your choice of profession is considered a primary moral decision.
This is, I think, perhaps one of the most challenging aspects for our modern, often compartmentalized capitalist society to really grasp. We often tend to separate our ethics, don't we? We might be, say, very charitable personally, but maybe quite ruthless in our business dealings. Jainism basically says that's impossible. You cannot claim to be personally nonviolent if your livelihood, the way you make money, inherently promotes, supports, or depends upon violence, exploitation, or even deceit.
So earning your living from a trade that causes harm makes you spiritually responsible for that harm, even if you're not the one, directly pulling the trigger or wielding the knife.
Yes, absolutely. Even indirect involvement carries responsibility. This must dramatically limit your career options if you're a devout Jain. It certainly does. It requires applying this powerful ethical filter to how you choose your employment or business. The principle is clear. If your profession causes sankalpi himsa, that intentional, avoidable harm we talked about, then you are actively jeopardizing your own spiritual progress. And the tradition historically was very specific about this. Texts often list numerous categories of trades that should be avoided.
Can you give us a sense of just how rigorous this was? What kinds of specific trades, maybe beyond the really obvious ones like weapons dealing or butchery, would be traditionally forbidden for a sincere Jain householder?
Well, the traditional lists, sometimes numbering 15, 19, or even more forbidden livelihoods, karmadana, are quite detailed and cover various types of harm. For example, trades involving large-scale agriculture that requires extensive digging or plowing or building large dams for irrigation were often discouraged because of the massive harm to earthworms, insects, microbes, those earth-bodied and one-sensed beings. Selling things like charcoal was forbidden because it necessitates cutting down trees, causing harm to plant life. Any trade involving highly addictive substances like alcohol or poisons. Animal trapping, hunting, or trading in animal products like ivory or fur, obviously. Even things like trade in slaves or promoting animal fights for entertainment reflecting historical contexts are explicitly condemned. Trading in weapons, of course, owning or operating machinery that causes significant pollution or destruction.
Wow. So it's not just about direct physical violence against animals or humans. It's about any trade that systemically supports violence against any category of jiva, or even violence against social trust, like through deceitful practices.
Precisely. It's a very broad understanding of harm. And this rigorous ethical filtering helps explain something often observed historically why Jains, as noted in sources like the Jainism Explained video, tended to gravitate towards certain professions. Fields like trade, banking, finance, gemology, law professions that, at least ideally, involve minimal direct physical violence and rely heavily on things like trust, honesty, mathematical precision, and careful judgment. These were seen as less karmically burdensome.
Okay, so choosing the right type of trade is step one. But what about the practice within that trade? It's surely not enough just to be, say, a merchant. How you conduct your business must also be intensely ethical, right?
Absolutely. That's the bedrock of ethical commerce in Jainism. Business practice has to be founded on unshakable honesty, satya, truthfulness, which is another core vow. Deceit in any form is viewed as a type of violence. It's violence against the consumer's financial well-being, yes, but also violence against the social fabric, against trust. So this means actively avoiding any kind of fraud, manipulation, using false weights and measures, deceptive advertising, misleading claims, anything that constitutes cheating or lying in commerce.
Because deception is essentially violence against the truth.
Yeah.
And that harms the spiritual integrity of both the person deceiving and the person being deceived.
Exactly. And that integrity extends beyond just the transaction itself into the products being traded, especially today. Lay Jains, householders, actively try to ensure the products they buy and use align with Ahimsa principles. This means meticulously checking labels to avoid products containing animal ingredients, even seemingly minor ones like gelatin, cochineal, or certain fats. It also means seeking out products that haven't been developed through animal testing, cosmetics, household cleaners, etc. It creates this powerful, spiritually motivated ethical consumerism.
Which brings us to what you called earlier a radical redefinition of success. If the main goal of your professional life cannot be just maximizing profit by any means necessary, then how on earth do you measure success in a Jain context?
Success gets redefined entirely. It's fundamentally shifted away from purely material accumulation. True success, from this perspective, isn't measured by the size of your bank account or your market share. It's measured by your ability to consistently prioritize spiritual good over worldly wealth. This demands that the ultimate pursuit, the highest value in your life, is spiritual progress liberation. Economic activity becomes secondary. It must serve that higher spiritual end, not obstruct it.
So let's say a really lucrative business opportunity comes along, but it involves cutting ethical corners, maybe exploiting workers or damaging the environment or selling a harmful product. The Jain path requires you to reject it, even if it means less profit.
Unquestionably, that's the ideal. As discourses like Muni Praman Sagarji's on Tankasai Prayog, the wise use of wealth, make clear, wealth accumulation itself isn't forbidden for householders, but it's the use of that wealth and the means by which it was acquired that truly defines your spiritual success. Real success is achieved by prioritizing altruism, charity, dana, and using wealth ethically for spiritual and communal good. Supporting temples, funding nonviolent initiatives, helping the needy, promoting education that aligns with these values. It basically transforms wealth from being the end goal into being merely a tool for ethical living and spiritual development. It completely flips the script on the standard definition of the ambitious, successful, modern professional, doesn't it?
When we pull all these threads together, this intense holistic awareness, I mean, from the ethics of not eating after dark because of microbes, to the complex calculus of a root versus a fruit, right through to the strict ethical constraints on your job and how you handle money. What seems to emerge is this incredibly comprehensive commitment to minimizing your footprint, minimizing your negative impact on everything around you. It feels like, well, long before we had Earth Day or climate change summits, Jainism had already codified this incredibly intense system of environmental care, just woven into the fabric of daily life.
I think that's a perfect way to put it. This is exactly why the philosophy feels so strikingly relevant, almost prophetic today. This profound commitment to nonviolence, when you apply it consistently and universally as Jains strive to do, it naturally extends to the entire planet, to the whole environment. Ahimsa, practiced rigorously, becomes functionally the original environmentalism. It teaches this fundamental principle. Minimize your violent impact, not just on humans and animals, but on the entire universe, including its elemental components.
Yeah, thinking back to that categorization of jivas, including earth-bodied, water-bodied, fire-bodied, air-bodied beings alongside plants. That's intrinsically ecological, isn't it? It views the very elements of nature, the soil, the water, the air, even fire, as containing life, as worthy of respect and non-harm. The extreme caution around the Anantakaya and root systems, the rules about water use, avoiding unnecessary digging, these all stem from that viewpoint.
Exactly. Jains understood millennia ago that all these forms possess life, possess a jiva. Therefore, protecting the environment isn't just about preserving resources for human use or aesthetics or even future generations, though those are valid. For Jains, it's more fundamental. It's a spiritual imperative because you are preserving the very homes and the actual lives of countless beings, earth-bodied, water-bodied, plant-bodied, and so on.
That quote you mentioned from the Jainism Explained video really hits home here. It highlights this inherent environmentalist outlook, noting that its principles are strikingly relevant in a world coming to terms with the fact that it may be consuming itself. And you see that, don't you? We're globally grappling with the consequences of systems built primarily to maximize convenience, profit, extraction, often with very little ethical restraint regarding the impact on the planet or other life forms.
And Jain principles offer this powerful counter-narrative. Here's a system designed from the ground up, specifically to minimize consumption, minimize destructive impact, maximize awareness of consequences. They teach this deep respect for resource scarcity, not just because resources might run out for humans, but because the very act of extracting and using those resources, digging minerals, using water, burning fuel, inevitably involves some level of violence against earth, water, fire, or plant bodies.
It feels like a quiet internal revolution of conscience, where almost every action becomes a reminder of your interconnectedness, your dependence on, and your impact on this vast web of life.
It really does. And this deep respect, this constant awareness demanded for every form of life, from the microbe to the mammal, it fosters more than just individual peace or ethical purity. It cultivates this profound systemic empathy, an empathy that naturally extends to the entire natural world, constantly highlighting that interconnected web of existence in a way that perhaps modern society is only now beginning to truly grasp, often forced by ecological crisis.
So by applying ahimsa with such incredible detail and rigor, from the unseen life swirling in the night air to the teeming ecosystem concentrated under the ground in a potato, right through to the ethics of how you earn and use your wealth, Jainism provides this remarkably coherent 360-degree approach to living.
Yes, it models true environmental responsibility, not just as a policy choice or a lifestyle trend, but as an absolute spiritual necessity woven into the very fabric of existence. Hashtag Outre Ram.
Well, this deep dive really shows, doesn't it, that ahimsa in practice is, well, it's a radical and incredibly holistic path. It demands total consistency, linking the personal and the professional, the seen and the unseen. It really asks us to look beyond the obvious, surface-level forms of violence and truly grapple with the subtle, often unseen, systemic implications of every single choice we make. It forces us towards consciousness, away from mere convenience.
That's a great summary. We've seen how, the simple difference between an apple and a potato can represent a profound calculation of life and death for the plant itself. We've seen how our responsibility to unseen life actually heightens the moment the sun goes down, and how true professional success isn't about profit at all costs, but about spiritual integrity, sometimes demanding we reject opportunities that cause harm. The profound takeaway, I think, is that our morality, our spiritual journey, isn't just in the big declarations. It's expressed, moment by moment, in the smallest, most mundane details of our daily lives.
Absolutely. And that brings us to our final provocative thought for you, our listeners, to perhaps carry forward from this discussion, inspired by this deep practice of ahimsa. What single, maybe small change could you consider making in your own daily routine this week? Perhaps in your diet, maybe choosing one food over another with this new awareness. Or perhaps in how you consciously choose to assess the products you buy. What one small step could you take to intentionally minimize your impact on the vast web of life around you, both seen and unseen?
Just reflecting on how that small shift in awareness, that intention, might subtly reshape your day, your choices. It's
Yeah.
powerful stuff. We hope you'll join us next time. Our focus then will turn more inward.